Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the second instalment of Laboratory of the Future Online Symposium 2023. I am Caroline Clark, and I am here to moderate today's event alongside my colleagues Athena Hansen-Ahern, George Hammond, and Roxanne Newman. Before we start the talks today, I just have some general information and a few tips for getting the most out of the event. Firstly, as well as a fantastic lineup of speakers we have for you, I'd like to point out the networking areas on the platform which you can use to chat with other delegates throughout the day. On the left-hand side, you will see the People tab, where you can access a list of attendees that you can contact. From here, you can message them privately and all your ongoing conversations will appear in the chats area. I encourage you to get involved and take this opportunity to speak to some of the other delegates that have registered for the event. If you are not sure who you would like to chat to, we encourage you to use our participant matching feature to match with attendees who share similar interests to you. Just navigate to the participant matching located in the left-hand menu and fill out a brief questionnaire. Our software will then do all the hard work for you and match you with other attendees with similar interests and goals. In this list of matches, there will also be a percentage match, which indicates how close of a match your responses were to the attendees in the list. Please remember that we encourage debate and discussion and welcome all of you to use our networking services to introduce yourselves to other attendees, but we do not permit the overt solicitation of products or services and reserve the right to block any user who infringes on this rule. On a similar note, all of today's talks offer ability for you to engage with our speakers via the Q&A session at the end of each talk. I encourage all of you to ask questions as this is the best opportunity to get the live answers from a panel of experts. We will explain how you can ask questions at the start of each presentation. It is also incredibly important to say that this event was only made possible thanks to our generosity of our sponsors and partners. In the Literature and Resources section, you can download free educational pieces from our sponsors and partners, including application notes, white papers and guides focused on Laboratory of the Future. For more detailed instructions of how to make the most of the features available to you at this event, please navigate to the event home and watch the overview video at the top of the page. We would like to ask if you could please refrain from video, audio, or photo recording of all talks. Many of our speakers have kindly agreed to share their slides with you, and these will be made available within the literature section of the platform. Some of our speakers will have included their contact details in their presentations. If they do, please feel free to reach out to them directly. If you'd like to contact the online symposia team at any point, please do contact us via the technical help tab at the bottom of the navigation bar on the left. Now with that, I will now pass you over to Athena, who will introduce our keynote session.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm Athena Hansen-Ahern, conference producer for Technology Networks. And with that, I will move on to introduce our first talk of the day, Supercomputing and the Scientist, How High-Performance Computing is Transforming Experimental Science. I am pleased to welcome our first speaker, Debbie Bard, as your keynote speaker. Debbie is a physicist and data scientist with more than 15 years' experience in scientific computing, both as a physicist and supercomputing expert. Her career spans research in particle physics, cosmology, AI, and computing, with a common theme of using supercomputing for scalable data analytics. Debbie currently leads the Data Science Engagement Group at the National Energy Research Scientific Computing Center, the US Department of Energy's Mission HPC Center. Debbie also leads the Super Facility Project, a cross-disciplinary project to build supercomputing infrastructure for experimental facilities across the Department of Energy. A very warm welcome to you, Debbie. Following the presentation, we will have a Q&A session and we welcome any questions that you may have. Please ask questions using the Q&A system to the right-hand side of the video player. You can also use this feature to connect with attendees and discuss the talk, so feel free to take advantage of the chat system by introducing yourself and sharing your thoughts during the presentation. If you experience any technical difficulties during the presentation, please request help using the technical help icon in the menu on the left-hand side of the player. And with that, I will hand over to Debbie to begin her presentation.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction. As Athena was saying, my name's Debbie Bard. I lead the Data Science Engagement Group at NERSC, which is one of the Department of Energy supercomputing centers. And yeah, my career has covered a lot of different areas of experimental science, but the theme that's really run through all of them is using and leveraging computing to get more information from data, to extract more meaning from the scientific data that we have available to us. And in the 10 to 15 years that I've been doing this, I've seen the way that we can leverage computing really change, really transform experimental science. And it's an area that I'm very excited about. So I'm excited to be talking to you about it today. So I'm going to start off with a bit of an introduction to the Department of Energy and the sort of range of science that we pursue in the Department of Energy, because that's very much the theme of what I'm going to be talking about, is how we want to connect the different science areas and the different science facilities to increase the impact of the science we do. So the Department of Energy Office of Science, you may or may not be aware, is the largest funding agency for basic research in physical sciences in the USA. The annual budget is something like $7.5 billion. It funds scientists in all kinds of institutions, in universities, as well as in the national labs. And this is really the core of the Department of Energy Office of Science, is the national lab system. There are 17 sites spread across the United States, employing over 77,000 people. You can see here they're really distributed all over the place. So I work at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's number 5 here in this little blow up of the San Francisco Bay. And the national labs are host to the Department of Energy user facilities. And our user facilities are available typically to any scientist anywhere in the world. You can make proposals for time or resources at these facilities. And they really are used by researchers from all around the world. Something like 36,000 users per year take advantage of these of the facilities available from the Department of Energy. And you don't need to be DOE funded to get access to these resources. So these facilities range across the whole span of DOE science. There are the computing facilities, which I'm going to be really talking about a lot more in a minute. But there's also facilities around genome sequencing, atmospheric research. There are light sources. There are fusion science experiments. There's particle physics experiments. There's really a huge range of science that's supported by the DOE user facilities. And something that I think is really striking about the user facilities is that it is actually relatively unusual for a scientist to be user of only one user facility. It's very common for a scientist to use multiple facilities. And this chord diagram here kind of shows the connections between the different facilities. You can see that each line here represents a user that is user of both, say, NERSC and Fermilab facilities. So there's a lot of connections between the facilities, and the sites that have the most cross connections with other facilities are the computing facilities. These are the ones that I've circled in red here. These are the USA supercomputing centers. So there are 3 of these, 3 computing user facilities. One is in Oak Ridge here, one is in Tennessee, one is in Argonne up in near Chicago, and then we have NERSC at Berkeley Lab, and NERSC is where I work. So the sites at Oak Ridge and Argonne are the leadership computing facilities. Their mission is to deploy the most powerful computers on the planet to advance both physical science and computing science. And NERSC's mission is to support the full range of science that is supported by the Department of Energy. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I do want to emphasize that we have 2 aspects to our mission in the DOE computing facilities. We want to enable scientists to push the boundaries of what's possible for science and innovation. So by deploying some of the largest systems in the world, we can enable scientists and engineers to explore systems that cannot be studied in the real world, perhaps because they're too large or too small, too dangerous or too complex. Our goal is to deploy computing infrastructure that can advance science for Department of Energy scientists. In addition to that, we also lead the nation and the world in supercomputing, high-end computational science, and advanced networking for science. So these two aspects of our mission really do fit well together. We have a mission to push the boundaries of what's possible in terms of computing hardware, software, and infrastructure in support of the science that Department of Energy is funding. So to talk more specifically about NERSC and what we do here, this is, as we said before, the mission high performance computing and data facility for the Office of Science. What this means is that any scientist who is funded by the Department of Energy can apply for time on our systems, and they get an allocation of compute hours, an allocation of storage that goes along with that. And because this is open to any DOE-funded scientist, we have almost 8,000 users every year. They come from nearly 2,000 different institutions from really across the world. And a couple of things that I want to point out. One is that the breakdown of our users looks like this, and around 50% of our users are early career scientists, so graduate students and postdocs. So I think it's really exciting, that we're able to support early career scientists and give them access to some of the most powerful computers on the planet. Another thing I want to point out is that we average around 1,800 refereed publications per year that cite NERSC. So we're really very proud of this. We're able to support a very large range of scientists, and we're able to make science happen for a huge range of different science areas. So this word cloud here shows the different science disciplines that are allocated time on our systems, and you can again see that it's a big range. We have a lot of people from chemistry, in the chemistry field, nuclear physics, condensed matter, high energy physics, also earth system sciences, energy technologies, fusion energy, astrophysics and cosmology, an area that's close to my heart, mathematics, geosciences. It's a huge range of different science that we support at NERSC. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about our systems, but I want to introduce our two supercomputers that we have on the floor at the moment. Perlmutter is the system that we are in the process of deploying right now. This is a 140 petaflop system, so it's a very powerful system. And it consists of two types of nodes. There are CPU-only nodes, and then there are GPU-accelerated nodes. So these are CPU nodes that have attached NVIDIA GPUs that can really accelerate computationally intense tasks that a lot of the codes that we run really need this kind of capability. Our other system is Cori. Cori is now about 7 years old. And it consists of, again, two types of nodes. One set of nodes are CPU nodes, kind of traditional CPU nodes, and then another set are Intel Xeon Phi many core nodes. And again, these offer more compute cores to accelerate very computationally intense calculations. And one of the reasons why we deploy these kinds of accelerated multi-core, many-core nodes is so that we can supply a lot of compute power within a relatively limited power budget. Power and cooling is a big factor when we're designing supercomputers. And so by being able to deploy accelerated nodes in our supercomputers, we can provide a lot of compute power for a minimum amount of cost in power and cooling. The other thing I want to point out about the resources that we have available is a really vast amount of storage that we have. We have something that is relatively unusual in computers of this scale is flash-based file systems attached to each of our supercomputers. We also have over 120 petabytes of our disk-based file system, and then around about 200 petabytes of archive data on tape. And this includes data that goes all the way back to the 1970s. So we really are a data archive for the scientists who work with us. And I want to emphasize that when I say that we have supercomputers, they really are big. They are huge and powerful machines. So Perlmutter, when we first measured its performance about a year ago, was the 5th most powerful computer on the planet. And currently it's the number 8 in the sort of top list of powerful supercomputers. So, I mean, what I want to emphasize is that in a very short space of time, we've dropped from number 5 to number 8, and that's an indication of how quickly this field is moving in terms of deploying new, larger, more powerful supercomputers. We're also very proud that this is the greenest supercomputer in the top 10. This is, again, due to the energy efficient architecture that we've been able to deploy. Cori, when it was deployed, was also number 5 on the top 100 list, but is currently 45. In the 7 years that Cori has been running, it's dropped from number 5 to 45. So Cori is a 30 petaflop system, Perlmutter is a 140 petaflop system, and as you can see, these are really large systems. I mean, physically, they take up a lot of space. They're about the size of your average big conference room. So to give you some idea of what this means, 140 petaflops is the power of 8.4 million laptops, all calculating together. Another way to think about this is that it is the power of 8 billion people on 21 million Earths, all doing one calculation per second, which is a huge amount of compute power. And it's also very important to note that these supercomputers can act, they're networked in such a way that they can act as one single unified compute system, which is really important because some science problems simply cannot be solved without that kind of scale of computing power. So as we're seeing rapid developments in the power of supercomputers, we're also seeing rapid developments in the power and capability of experimental technology. And I want to illustrate this as one example from the National Center for Electron Microscopy. It's a user facility at the Molecular Foundry here at Berkeley Lab. They use electron microscopes to answer questions like how the structure of batteries impacts performance, how can you design nanocrystals to store carbon dioxide. And to answer these questions, they have developing very powerful and very high resolution detectors. So they're developing currently new detectors for a 4D scanning transmission electron microscope. This is kind of what it looks like here in the little animation to the left. And a key feature of this is that it's very high resolution, it's very fast, and this means it produces a huge amount of data. One scan is about 1,000 by 1,000 pixels, and it captures about 700 gigabytes in 15 seconds, which there's two kind of challenges to this. Scientists who have been given time on these instruments, they want to make good use of their time. They might only be allocated a couple of days or maybe a couple of shifts access to these very highly sophisticated instruments. And they want to be able to make good use of that time. So they can't take the data home with them, to analyze later, because it's, for one thing, it's too big to be able to do that. And for another thing, it would be wasting their time at the detector. So they need to be able to analyze this data while they're sitting at the microscope performing the experiment, so that if there's a problem with the sample or something wrong with the configuration, they can make adjustments in real time during the experiment and make sure they get good data. When you have this kind of scale of data, you really need HPC scale computing available on demand to analyze the data while the user is there at the microscope. So this is not a unique challenge that we hear. We have a lot of users at NERSC from experiment teams who are facing similar challenges. And I want to emphasize that their needs go well beyond simply having compute time available to them and having some disk space. To be able to do these kinds of workflows where you're taking data from an experiment, analyzing it, perhaps in real time, perhaps combining it with simulations, and then serving data back to a scientist, there's a lot more infrastructure that's required. So some features of this, they have very high data volumes that don't just sit at NERSC, but also need to be moved between sites. These collectively, the experimental science teams use something like 20% of NERSC compute hours, but they use almost 80% of our data storage, and that data is very mobile. They also need, as I was talking about, they need to have real-time and interactive access to supercomputing scale power while their experiments are running. And this is not how we normally operate a supercomputing center. Normally, you have a compute application that you want to run, you submit it to the batch system, and then you wait, perhaps for days, for it to reach the top of the queue, and then it can run. So having real-time or interactive access is quite unusual for us. And these workflows have to run across multiple compute sites. They might be running part of their analysis close to the instrument. They might be running part of their analysis at NERSC or somewhere else, perhaps in the commercial cloud. And to control these workflows, they need a whole ecosystem of edge services. And when I talk about edge services, I mean computing infrastructure that is not sitting inside the supercomputer, but that sits next to the supercomputer. So it has access to the compute systems, it has access to the file systems, but it's not actually within the supercomputer itself. And these edge services include these workflow managers, visualization tools, web services, databases, the ability to serve the data up to a very large scientific community. And all this has to be automated. Scientists don't want to have to be there sort of continuously pressing buttons while they're running the experiment. They want it to just work so they can spend their time and energy focusing on the science and on the results rather than sort of trying to debug computing infrastructure. So all of this kind of we at Berkeley Lab, we've put together as the super facility concept. We recognize that a super facility, you can just think of it as connected facilities with a experiment facility connected to the Energy Sciences Network, which is the kind of the Department of Energy's Internet for Science. And then at the other end, connected to a computing facility. But we certainly recognize that just making those links and making those connections does not result in an easy experience for the scientists. And they really need access to the kind of infrastructure and expertise and community that's necessary to make this kind of model a real success, to make it something that will work easily and seamlessly for their scientists. So we've been thinking a lot about what's involved in this, what's required, what we need to build. And we, over the past few years, have been coordinating work via a super facility project. Now, a key part of this project and how we've organized this work has been our engagements with science teams. So we work very closely with 8 different science teams from very different areas of science, from fusion energy to dark matter detection to electron microscopy to telescopes. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these in a minute. But by working very closely with lots of science teams, we're able to build infrastructure that meets the needs of multiple science teams and that hopefully will scale to all of our users at NERSC. This work is all in service of our project goal, which is to be able to demonstrate automated data analysis pipelines that can do this data analysis at scale using the capabilities that we've identified as really key needs from the requirements gathering we've done with our science teams. So this is real-time computing support, having the networking that allows the data to get where it needs to go, and then the tools necessary to move that data. For example, Globus is a very popular tool in the scientific community. We want to have automation driven by API interfaces. We want to be able to support interactive data analysis at supercomputing scale via Jupyter. We want to be able to ease some of the issues around identity management and access control across multiple sites using federated identity. And we also want to build out these edge services that I was just talking about, supported via our SPIN platform. So there are a few principles I kind of want to emphasize behind this approach that I think are pretty general to these kinds of projects when you're working with multiple science communities and trying to coordinate a lot of different work being done in a lot of different places. And this is that our work has to be integrated, scalable, and sustainable. So, we've integrated requirements from multiple science teams. We've integrated the work that's been going on in many groups across Berkeley Lab, and this really helps avoid duplication of efforts. It helps kind of make everything more streamlined and easier to manage for us in the long term. By collecting requirements from a lot of different science teams, we're hoping that we're hitting all the challenges that our users are going to face so that we can scale the infrastructure out to our full user base, not just the 8 science teams that we're working with in the project, but these are tools that need to be usable by all 8,000 NERSC users. And it also has to be scalable in another sense, that the work we're doing has to scale to the kind of supercomputing capability size. So they need to be able to run at very large scale on our systems and on our very capable storage systems. And all this is in also has to be very sustainable. And again, there's two different sort of aspects to sustainability here. We recognize that experiments are, especially big user facilities, they operate over many years. And the last thing they need is to design their computing infrastructure and then 2 years later have to redesign the whole thing because some capabilities have changed underneath them. We need to make sure that what we're designing is going to be sustainable for the experiment teams in the long run to be able to rely on them. And this also has to be sustainable for us to support. You know, we have 8,000 users. We can't design infrastructure that is very brittle or takes a lot of hands-on effort on our part to maintain. We have to be able to have a scalable and sustainable support model as well. All right, so I'm going to talk now about 3 different aspects of some of the technologies we've deployed here. The first is SPIN, which, as I mentioned before, is a cloud-inspired edge service platform for science. So this is a it really is cloud inspired. So we use Kubernetes based management system here. We actually use Rancher products which manages this all for us. This enables scientists to deploy whatever it is that they need to do, science gateways, data repositories, workflow managers. They can all be managed very simply by scientists who can deploy these services with Docker containers. So this is very much sort of taking modern design principles and deploying them in a supercomputing environment. So this sits on infrastructure adjacent to our supercomputers, but it can access the HPC file system and, very importantly, the HPC interconnect. So they can be used to orchestrate complex workflows both at NERSC and at other sites, and I'll show you some examples of that later. And we have, we have more than these 3 example projects here using SPIN. I think we have something like 70 to 80 projects now who are actively using SPIN to manage their workloads, both at NERSC and across other sites. So the second part that I want to talk about is our efforts to make supercomputers machine readable. This is the development of the API calls into most, if not all, NERSC functions. So our vision is to make all NERSC interactions callable. And this is something that should be very simple, very straightforward for a software designer to be able to interact with. And if there's anything more complex that needs to happen to provide some of the functionality here, that has to happen on the back end. That's up to us to design so that the API call itself is something very straightforward for a scientist to use. And shifting to this kind of model rather than a user kind of logging in via SSH and doing everything very interactively, this makes everything simpler both for the users in terms of designing their workflow, and for us, it's much easier for us to support functionality if we just have to provide a straightforward API interface. And we also do this because we want to fit modern software design patterns. And this is, I think, particularly important because we have so many early career scientists coming in. Their training is very often in this model. Their experience is in API calls, shared libraries. We want to sort of make it straightforward for them to transfer their experience and knowledge to NERSC so they can design their workflows easily without having to learn the intricacies of a supercomputer necessarily. And this also allows us to use as kind of industry standard authentication and security models, which is very important because we have spent a very long time and a lot of effort thinking this through carefully. Opening up a supercomputing center takes very careful consideration to move to a model of using API calls rather than having users log in through something like SSH. Now, NERSC is an open science center, so we don't do any classified research, but we are still a target for malicious actors, as any big computing center is. And so trying to we've come up with a model that keeps us secure, but at the same time offers this functionality to users. And I think this is a really important thing that you need to consider when you are looking for API type interfaces. A security model has to be watertight. And this is something that we've been spending a lot of time working on. The third part that I want to point out, I want to talk a little bit about, is interactive supercomputing through Jupyter notebooks. So we have at the moment, I think, about as many scientists interface with our systems through Jupyter notebooks as they do through the SSH interface. So Jupyter is really becoming one of the primary ways that scientists use HPC systems. And so in recognizing this, we've deployed an HPC-aware Jupyter service. We've built frameworks that enable Jupyter notebooks to connect with HPC so they can launch from our Jupyter Hub web server, which currently runs on the Spin infrastructure. Scientists can launch notebooks on a login node, which can then spawn MPI, so very large scale parallel HPC jobs on the compute nodes of a supercomputer, and pull the data back and do interactive analysis and visualization of that data in real time. And I wanted to pull out this user quote, which is something that I really enjoy. We do a user survey every year, and this is one of the best responses we ever had. There are three important things in life: food, shelter, and Jupyter. Everything else is optional. So this is something that's really, really important for our users. All right, I now want to talk about a few science examples of what this looks like in practice and how some of the science teams we work with are using this infrastructure. So going back to the National Center for Electron Microscopy, who I'd mentioned earlier, with their very high resolution detectors that they're trying to analyze the data from, they've built a workflow that takes data from their site at the Molecular Foundry, transfers that, does a little bit of pre-processing on that data, transfers it to NERSC, where it is analyzed at large scale on our supercomputing center, supercomputing systems. Then the results are displayed back to the scientist in the app that runs on our Spin infrastructure. And then the scientist can use Jupyter to do interactive manipulation of that data, to kind of look at it and alter it and view it in different ways. This is all controlled through a workflow app called Distillus, is developed by Kitware, and this runs on our Spin infrastructure, and it controls all the aspects of this workflow: the data movement coming from the Molecular Foundry to NERSC. It controls all the compute, running the compute jobs, monitoring the jobs, resubmitting work if necessary, and it also hosts the interactive data manipulation. So the key needs here is that they have automated, fast turnaround, large-scale data analysis. And through the technologies we've developed as part of the Super Facility project, we've been able to make this happen so that the scientists can look at their results and analyze their results within minutes of the scan being taken. Another example I want to go through that's a slightly different science case and a slightly different workflow is dark matter detection. So the LZ experiment is it's a big tank of liquid xenon. Sort of, you can see this here. It sits a mile underground in South Dakota, and it needs to be far underground because it needs to be in a very quiet environment. It needs to reduce the amount of background radiation that it experiences, because it's sitting there in the quiet, in the dark, waiting for a dark matter particle to come and hit it. And so when a dark matter particle comes and hits this tank of xenon, it produces a very recognizable signal that can be detected by these detectors at the top of the tank, which you can see up here. So this is running 24/7, and so their needs from NERSC are a little bit different from these experiments where they're running, they're taking some data and they need to analyze the data. This is a different kind of model of workflow. And this experiment has been running now for a little over a year. They have so far not seen any dark matter particles, but this means that they're able to exclude a lot of the models of dark matter because based on the fact that they haven't seen any dark matter interactions. And in fact, their results that they released at the end of last year, some of the most are the most sensitive results in the world for dark matter detection. So how do they use NERSC? Well, like I said, their workflow is a little different. They take data from their detector down the mine. That comes up to the surface and then is transferred to NERSC, where the data is processed, and they run a number of checks for the detector health. So this isn't the full data analysis. This is a kind of small scale analysis where they're looking to see if there's any impurities or any problems with their detector. They want to do that here. And so this is a process that's running continuously, of course, as the detector's taking data all the time. And then the data is also, so the data quality assessment is served up to the scientists who are keeping an eye on things. And the data is then stored at NERSC and also transferred over to another data center that they have in the United Kingdom. So they then later on will do post sort of offline analysis, large scale analysis of that data, which is then going to be manipulated by many of their collaboration, which consists of a few hundred scientists. So kind of the things that they're doing with NERSC are a little bit different than the previous example, but the basic model of the of how they are operating is actually has a lot of similarities. Like the infrastructure they're using is very similar to the infrastructure used by the electron microscopy community. So they have an app based on our API, which is running on Spin. It monitors and controls the data movement between the various sites. It monitors and controls the compute. And it also gives the web portal for the data and the information that's being analyzed at NERSC. Okay, so another example I want to talk about, again, a very different science area. This is in genome sequencing. So the Joint Genome Institute is a user facility also based at Berkeley Lab. They take samples from users, sequence them, and perform very high-level analysis of the sequencing data on behalf of their users. They are asking some really, I think, some of the most exciting questions around in science about the nature of biology. They're looking at things like virus evolution. How do viruses evolve over time, perhaps over millions of years? They're looking at microbiome, so sequencing samples that contain the DNA of an entire microbiome of soil and trying to understand something about how that impacts the success of crops that are growing in that soil. So they have a lot of users. They have over 100,000 users of their own. And every year they analyze a lot of data. They have over 7 petabytes of archive data, which is mostly sitting at NERSC. So in this case, our users at NERSC are not the JGI users. Our users are the JGI staff themselves. So they use NERSC resources, among other places, to do this analysis, to collect this data and answer questions in collaboration with the scientists who use the JGI. So they have something that I think is really exciting. They have cross-site automated workflows. So they submit workflows to the JGI Analysis Workflows Service, known as JAWS. And JAWS is basically workflows as a service. It handles data movement between sites via Globus. It handles resource allocations via HT Condor and Slurm. HT Condor is a resource manager that's very commonly used in particle physics, actually. And they execute all this data analysis in containers. This means that they have a very portable workflow and they run it at many different sites. So this is controlled from NERSC, but they can send work out to compute resources they have at the Pacific Northwest National Lab. They can send resources to the Berkeley Lab IT cluster. They can send resources out to the commercial cloud. They can use Amazon, AWS, for example. And I think one of the reasons why I want to bring this up is not just because this is something that's hosted at NERSC, and so we've been able to deploy the infrastructure that allows them to do this, but this is really indicative of where we're going in the future with DOE infrastructure as a whole. The super facility model, I think, has been very successful at NERSC. We're able to support a lot of science teams now, and the work isn't finished. We're still very much actively developing this, but we're starting to think as well, in collaboration with many others within the Department of Energy, is how we can extend this model to multiple facilities. The real goal here is to leverage all the DOE resources that I was talking about at the beginning of my talk, all the computing facilities, all the different scientific user facilities. We want scientists to have easier access to an integrated research infrastructure that covers all of this, all the resources and investments that the DOE has made. So we've started thinking about this. There's a huge amount of work that needs to be done, but the challenges are very similar to the challenges we faced in the super facility project. Challenges including security, the problems of identity and access management across facilities. This is hard enough within one facility. Doing this across multiple facilities is really challenging. Also data management across multiple sites. How do you register where data is? How do you know where it's been? What's the provenance of it? All these things are very important and an active research topic. And we need to make sure that not only does the data get where it needs to go, but that the compute tasks get to the right place at the right time. And that kind of level of resource management will be very challenging. And then there's the problem of portability. Scientists need to run their analysis from their laptop all the way up to supercomputing scale. And that's something that's very difficult to design in. So we've started thinking about this in the super facility project for one facility. And within the Department of Energy, we're starting to think about how this could scale out to something much more significant. And the last example I want to give is really illustrates why this is exciting and why this is important. And this is supercomputing for fusion energy. So there are scientists around the world who are asking the question of how can we efficiently operate the fusion reactors of the future. So this is one example of a fusion reactor. It's a tokamak. It is basically a donut that creates a very intense plasma field within that donut, kind of illustrated here. And that plasma field is contained in a magnetic field. And this is an illustration of that magnetic field. Now, this is a complex operation. This magnetic field is very delicate. It's very tightly controlled by the operators. And this is something that we have been working with scientists who are developing methods to use supercomputing scale resources to tightly control and manage the magnetic field to produce long-lived and very efficient fusion processes, something that we're very excited about and is very forward-looking for our energy future. So what this looks like, there is data that comes from the tokamak, the data readout, which comes all the way over to NERSC. This data is then analyzed. Machine learning comes into this a lot. There's a lot of machine learning analysis which can be done very quickly on this data. And based on the data, this can then inform a simulation of the experiment that has just run using the exact parameters of the plasma field and the parameters of the magnetic field that was used to confine it. Now, by combining the data analysis and this simulation, this digital twin of the experiment, the scientist who's running an experiment at the fusion reactor can adjust their parameters for their magnetic confinement field in a way that results, hopefully, in a more stable and more reactive fusion plasma. So this is, a slightly more complex workflow. There still is the need for fast turnaround, automated analysis. This is also coupled with simulation based on the data readback. And this is something that we've been able to demonstrate within 10 minutes or so. We've been able to take the data, have the analysis run. At the moment, we haven't been able to do this in combination with the simulation, but that's what we're working towards. And we've been able to get turnaround down to about 10 minutes. And something that's particularly impressive about that is that this is an international super facility. So we've been working with scientists at the K-STAR experiment in South Korea. Data comes from South Korea across the Pacific Ocean to NERSC, and we were able to do the data analysis turnaround in about 10 minutes. And this is really the model that the fusion community is looking at for the future. So the ITER experiment, for example, which is in the south of France, is developing this model, and it will enable scientists from around the world to sit at their home institution and control the experiments in France through this model of large-scale simultaneous data analysis, simulation, and feedback for experimental parameters. And that's something, again, we're very excited to be part of this. It's really enabling new models for operating experiments. Okay, so to summarize, hopefully I've convinced you that the DOE operates a unique set of user facilities and national labs. And the theme of everything that I've been talking about today is that when these facilities can be used together, we can amplify the impact of the science we're producing. This is very much in the spirit of the mission of the DOE Office of Science. Now, experiments increasingly need supercomputing scale resources for their data analysis, and this can include large-scale simulation and digital twins. And this is something we've recognized at NERSC, and we've been pioneering new modes of access to our systems to support experimental science. And we can now support urgent and complex workflows from facilities around the world, in addition to the large-scale simulations and modeling that we also support from our user base. So we're finding ways for these different needs to coexist on our systems. Now, there are still many challenges in this area, and honestly, I think this is what makes it exciting. The possibilities here are immense in terms of what we can do for experimental science, and I think this is probably the most exciting area of development in high-performance computing. So if you're interested in learning more, you can Google the Super Facility Project Report. This is a publication we made last year, which summarizes all the work we've done in some detail, the technical work we've done, and also some more detail about the scientific capabilities we've enabled. We also talk here about our future priorities and some of the lessons we've learned, particularly around project management, which for these large collaborations, I think has been really interesting. All right, and thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions you have now.